Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the JakesRC Stuff Chit-Chat or JakesRC Chit-Chat. I've forgotten what this is. It's the JakesRC Stuff podcast basically, but it has a fancier name that I've immediately forgotten. But this is not just a normal episode of the podcast. This is actually going to be my review and sort of afterthoughts of now flying two planes with the ZOHD Kopilot in, and going to give my thoughts. So I've installed it in a Dart 250G and a Micro/Nano Skyhunter, and I've flown them both. And other than the fact I need to sort the gyro gains on the roll down on both of them, fantastic. Really impressed because it's so light. It's so easy to install relative to something like iNav, and the setup especially. Everything just plugs in, and then there's some slightly dodgy setup, which we'll go into the negative points towards the end of the video. And it works. Super easy. So again, the only flight modes that you have is off, as in no stabilization. You have balanced. And then in the other direction, you have return to launch. Now, return to launch, it is one of these flight controllers that controls the throttle. But unlike other flight controllers that I've used in the past, mostly iNav, because I don't really put the throttle in on the FY41s, they basically, they're constantly throttling up and down all over the place. Whereas this one seemed to hover at about half throttle, depending on the plane. And it was fine. So yeah, just really impressed with that. Again, the stabilization was a bit much on the settings that I had it on. In terms of return to launch, with the Dart, again, I'm going to do a separate video on the sort of overview of both of those planes. It had way too much aileron in general. I landed it before I broke it, to be brutally honest with you. Just had far too much aileron both on control and on the gyro. Skyhunter was fine for control, but too much still with the gyro. Now, in terms of... So I was able to fly that around. I flew it a little bit of a distance away, hit return to launch. It turned around and came back and began to do a circle. I decided, because I was flying while there was other people around, because I was at a proper, in inverted commas, flying club, that I wasn't going to let it circle round because there's people there and they get a bit argy-bargy if you go behind yourself, supposedly, although there were some other things on that day that was a bit that never got picked up on because it was being done by the site safety officer. But anyway, in terms of it actually turned the model round and came back and began to circle. I'm not too bothered about circles. Some people are really upset if the circle around them isn't very good. I'm not that bothered. I want it to come back to the point where I can see landmarks and know where I am, and then I will knock it out and take over. That is the shit is hit the fan switch. You know, it brings it back if something's drastically wrong or I don't know where I'm going or whatever, or I've been injured, which that plane didn't have return to launch when I got injured, but we'll gloss over that. And it can, it's the shit hits the fan switch, and that I'm just really, really impressed with it. So what I need to change really to make both of them fly better is on the little control board where you've got the pots to set the amount of stabilization on each control surface. So up if it's pointed at 12 o'clock, that is 0 or very little, and then if you move it all the way around to the right, that's 100% in one direction, and all the way to the left is 100% in one direction. So if you put it in your model, you tilt the model down, it puts more down in instead of putting up in. You need to put it to the... So, if you set it 6 o'clock, you need to set it to... 9 o'clock, you need to set it to 3 o'clock instead. I set them both to about 50%, because that's what the FY41 that I use in most of my other planes is set to out the box and is normally fine. And they were both far too much on both of them. I'll say that for the individual videos, but I need to turn that down from 50 to maybe 25%. It does seem to slightly overdo it on roll. Pitch was fine on both of them. I think pitch could do a little bit of turning down the Dart, but it's fine on the Micro Skyhunter. And yeah, just overall really impressed with the control board overall, it's so cheap. It's like 33 quid, less sometimes. Comes with some models if you're buying those models from ZOHD, like the 250G is, and like the Drift, although I may have one of those sat behind me, but I've bought it for a different purpose, so I didn't get the Kopilot or the camera. I'll also discuss the camera in the Dart and Skywalker videos separately. And it's the type of thing, I've always had an argument, there are some planes that don't need a gyro in. Something like a Bixler or the AXN, for example, or like a lightweight glider that you're just sort of flying about and having fun with nearby, where you know all the local landmarks. I 99% of the time fly from the same place, so I know all the landmarks. I'm not flying at new places very often. I can see why if you're flying at new places all the time, why you'd want some sort of return to launch, because you can't pick out the landmarks. I know a lot of the landmarks near where I fly, so return to launch or even an on-screen display within reason isn't that important. So something like a Bixler or an AXN or something like that I'm just flying around trees and things nearby, I don't need a flight controller for. But, and I've said that for a long time, the Kopilot may have changed that. You know, for example, I had a BFG 2600, which is very similar to the Big Diamond, and it's been re-released under a few different things from Art Tech. The Diamond is the big one, 2600. BFG, big fucking glider or big friendly giant, depending on which way you're inclined. And when we got that, we loaded it with an FY41 because the idea was going to be my dad's. He wanted something to sort of glide about with, to try FPV with, but it was too heavy really to glide about with. It would go places still under motor, but it was just a bit too heavy with like a 5200 4S in, all this extra jollop. So now it still has the 5200, but it just has a really small camera and a small video transmitter on there, even a smaller antenna just to try and keep the weight down, and it's brilliant. Really a lot of fun. I need to do some slight repairs to it, because the last time I flew it I took a chunk out of my arse cheek. That's a story for another day. But yes, so something like that, or again in this AXN that's like the next thing on the build table, I'm half tempted to put a Kopilot in it. In all honesty, I'm not going to the AXN to begin with because I do have a Kopilot sticking around, but that's for going in the Sky Surfer to the test with an OSD to make like the full package. Again, we'll go on to that into OSD in a minute. Otherwise, I'd probably still want in the AXN just to like smooth it out in higher wind. But you know, it doesn't really need it. But if you've got one on the shelf, if I decide to swap out the Kopilots for something different, because I do have an SNL Owl that just arrived yesterday or the day before, which is a 50 quid flight controller that's, you know, return to launch and everything, but it has an on-screen display. If I decide I love them, I'm going to take them out of the stuff I am going to do general and long range with, like the Dart and the Sky Hunter. When I say long range, obviously legally. Then I might put them in models I'm going to keep nearby, but it would be nice to have a return to launch in a panic. You know, they can go in there instead of being sat on a shelf if I do take them out. So I'm going to go and cover 4 negative points. Now, 3 of them I would say are negative points, and the last one is kind of a wish for a Mark II or a future product. So the first one is the instructions suck. If you watch the video, especially on the Dart, the Sky Hunter, I can't remember which one I did first, the Sky Hunter or the Dart. I think it was the Dart. The Dart, I complained a lot while setting it up, and I think that if I could get it the right, because it also suddenly worked by mistake, you know, like it just started working. If I could work out how I actually did those things and write a decent set of instructions, or if somebody else writes a decent set of instructions, excellent. I think they're just trying to ram too much information on one sheet of paper to save space and money and all these other things, and there's also the fact that it's a Chinese translation and all of those type of things. But it's a nightmare. But if somebody can make better instructions, then that obviously goes out the window really easy. It's not a fault with the product itself, and I'm sure that once you've set up loads of these models, it'll be very natural, and it's a lot easier to learn, of course, than iNav if you're completely new to that. Now, this is something that I haven't personally experienced. This is issue number 2. But when unplugging the little control board with the button on and the 3 or 4 pots on, there's a little bit of an issue that I can't remember if you unplug it while it's plugged in, or you unplug it while it's switched off and then switch it back on. it loses your settings and go back to default, which is really stupid. And I didn't know that until I watched Matthew Ogborn's overview of it. It's not. I'm keeping the boards plugged into mine. They might as well, saves them getting lost. But that's something that they could improve, or at least shout about more on the instructions not to do. It may be on there, but I certainly didn't see it, so they've not shouted about it enough. Issue number 3, because even non-INAV flight controllers can do this, is you can't rotate the board. So the board has to be flat level with the arrow pointing forward, which is fine in the Dart and the Skyhunter. But, for example, I have a micro Skywalker, which I wanted to set up like my big ones always used to be, with return to launch, everything like that, just in a nice small package. And we have a slight problem that I was going to use iNav, but then as I've said before, I've fallen out with iNav, but that might be the reason why there's a ZOHD drift behind me to try and fix that issue. And it isn't wide enough to fit one of these boards facing forward. It would fit if I rotated it 90 degrees in the yaw axis, because it's slightly thinner in one way. It would fit that way, because I could also trim off the little screws to screw it down, because it's not going to be screwed down. And it would also fit, of course, if I could put it on its side, so roll it 90 degrees, if that makes sense. But you can't do that. As far as I can work out, you have to have it the right way forward, which is, out of those other 2 issues that I've said, they are nothing compared to the fact that you can't rotate the board, because it physically means you can't put it in some planes, other than making a bodge job of it. Especially when it's designed for these smaller planes. I know the Micro Skywalker, is an older thing, but I'm sure there's other situations where people would love it to have it backwards or forwards or on its side, or if it's a thin fuselage, rotating it 90 degrees in the roll axis to make it thinner. If they could do some sort of push buttony thing or something in a future software update to new ones they bring out, that'd be nice. And the last one is the biggest one why some people are going to be turned off of this product to use it for long range, and that's the fact it doesn't have an OSD. They advertise that it does if you use their piggyback camera, but all that has on it is the time you've been flying, the voltage, and what band the camera's on. Not distance to home, height, which way to go to home, and things like that. So I want to offer ZOHD a solution to this without having to make a completely new product, just an add-on for the already existing Kopilot Lite. And the fact they've called it Lite has me hopeful they may do a full Kopilot at some point, which I would really look forward to. That could be maybe around the £50 mark, similar to the SNL Owl that I've got on the side to test. Back in the day, the first flight controller that I had, at least for fixed wing, was the Feutech FY21. Now I have the 40 they also have the 30 between the two. There was no 11 or 11 or 121, whatever. The 21 was the first one, and what they had is they had the flight controller and the on-screen display separate, and you could put a GPS into the flight controller and use it on its own. You could also put a GPS into the on-screen display and use that on its own, or you can use them in tandem. And the way that worked is you'd put the GPS into the FY21, which is the flight controller section, or in our case, the Kopilot Lite, and then they had just a 2-prong. It was still a 4-connection connector, but it only had 2 wires coming out of it, which then came out of the FY21 to the AP0117, which is the on-screen display box. And on those cables, of course, what you had is the transmitter and receiver for the GPS, so that it could find out its GPS position, so that the flight controller gets direct access to the information to make it do return to launch and everything properly, which is important. And there's a redundant, a secondary thing, it then feeds the on-screen display, which is a sensible way of doing it. I'd much rather have it come back with no on-screen display than have on-screen display and it go in the ground. So, that's, for me personally, that's the way that I would want it. And not only did it allow the GPS information, so it could do altitude, speed, all that other gubbins, return to home arrow, distance away from home. Also on that line, it allowed them to have the flight mode, so it could have return to launch, ABM, FAF, fantastic mode, which is fixed altitude flight, but there was FAF as a mode on FY21. And it's great. And it was brilliant. And you could use the on-screen display on its own. Obviously, it wouldn't show you the flight controller mode, but that really isn't important. To go back to the Kopilot, if you look at the Kopilot, you've got the main sort of PCB with all the stuff on it, all the components on it, with then 4 little spacers, and then like a covering PCB or bit of plastic to cover up all those components and to put its name on. What I propose is that they could sell an on-screen display that replaces that top board. So you just undo the 4 screws, put this board on top. Now you might think, how are they going to interface with each other? Well, also included in that box is a wire lead, basically, or a splitter that splits the, you plug the pre-existing GPS from your Kopilot into it, and then it splits into the Kopilot Lite, and its other section of it splits into the Kopilot OSD, I suppose it could be called. And, all you would have is video in and video out for your transmitter and camera, because the on-screen display could get its power from that GPS wire, because it has to power the GPS as well. Although, are they only like 3 volts or 5 volts? I can't remember, but okay. That's a possible small issue. But I want this to be compatible with the Kopilots that everybody already has, without them having to make a V2. Because splitting the GPS gives you everything you really need. The home arrow, the speed, all of that stuff. And in terms of having the flight mode on there, it's not that important with the Kopilot, because it only has like off, balance mode and return to launch. And nowadays, compared to when the FY21 was around, everyone's on FreeSky. Well, okay, the vast majority of people are on FreeSky. And you can have the flight modes be talked to you. So I have manual, auto balance and return to launch on the switch, and I can hear it. I understand that not everyone's on FreeSky. I understand that some people are deaf or hard of hearing, or other jollop. Fair enough, but I don't see it. Maybe they could do that in the Kopilot Mark II. They could have that fed across, but this is just what I could suggest for now. Sorry, I just thought the window cleaners might have been here. Could hear like a stepladder being knocked about. So yeah, that would be the on-screen display. You'd just screw on top. You'd have that split lead if you wanted to, because I believe the Kopilot has a couple of PWM. You could plug it into what would be like channel 7 maybe, or whatever it would be, and have the on-screen display turn on and off, or have different modes, but that's not required. All you need is a separate board to the on-screen display with the in and the out for the camera and transmitter, and the GPS Y lead or split lead, so that it gets both the flight controller and the on-screen display get the information. There are plenty of people who do this already with like using the same GPS for flight controllers, on-screen display, and say antenna trackers. So it's already a done thing. Obviously you only need to power it once. You don't need to power it from all these separate devices. And again, it could just screw on top. And also I think with that much PDB space, you could at least get a 30 amp current sensor on there, which would cover all of ZOHD's smaller stuff. Or 50 amps would also cover their bigger stuff, like the Talon GT, the Dart XL, and other models people might put it in, like Bixlers and AXNs and things like that, where 30 is going to be like right at the limit. Maybe 30 constant 50 amp boost, blip, whatever you want to call it. That'd be fantastic, and I think they could fit that all on a board that goes where the nameplate is on the Kopilot. Even if they have to make it a double stacked board and include extra spaces to get the two boards away from each other, I think it's perfectly possible. And in all of the planes that I've put the Kopilot in, both the Sky Hunter, which was never designed around it, and the Dart 250, which was designed around it, or at least considered during the design, it would fit with the second on-screen display plate on top. And again, they could sell it as an add-on for because you could sell the same OSD unit as an add-on for both the Kopilot lights that already exist, or possibly make a Kopilot 2 light and a 2 regular. The regular has the on-screen display boards put together already, or you could just have the Kopilot 2 light be the flight controller only, and the main difference being, maybe fixing the other issues that I've mentioned with the board unplugging and the unable to rotate the board, and possibly adding the ability to do software upgrades so we don't have to have a Mark III in the future. But also maybe you could have an extra pin on that GPS plug so that it can have the flight mode display on the screen. But again, the flight mode is the least of its worries. Just ZOHD, please. I'm speaking directly to you now. Make this on-screen display board. All it needs to do is have, like what most on-screen displays do, and don't make it blink like the one on iNav does. I watch people flying with iNav and they've got this shit blinking on the screen. I'm like, if it's not we're about to run out of battery and die, I don't want it blinking. But just a basic on-screen display with the, a return to home arrow, distance, speed, altitude, GPS coordinates would be helpful. Probably some others that I'm forgetting, but it doesn't need to be that complicated. That just takes the GPS feed that's split off, then absolutely fantastic, and it would be my go-to flight controller, and I would probably not use anything else. Because the FI41, it's nice that it has airspeed as well. It's nice that it has a 100 amp current sensor, I believe. It's also nice that it has a flight mode and that it's one box, although there'd be one box with this one, just two things put together. And also, of course, if it was a cable, if people wanted to run it flat but wider, as in, say, on a flying wing that doesn't have a fuselage, just a normal flying wing like a Tech Sumo, where you don't have much height, but you could possibly put multiple things in the wing. If it's a cable and the only thing that draws them together is a split GPS cable, then you can have the two boards sat next to each other in the plane. Super thin, for something like that. But yeah, ZOHD, please make the on-screen display add-on. And I know that there is an on-screen display, little tiny, like the size of a postage stamp board, and I'm sure you could rig that up to work, and it uses the same on-screen display type as the one that's in iNav. But it's not as neat as it literally just screwing on top of the old one. I'm sure you could glue it to a bit of wood that's got the right holes and everything, because it's smaller than that. But yeah, I want at least an on-screen display, if not an on-screen display with a current sensor, and then on top of that you can also turn the on-screen display on and off, and the flight mode being on there. But just please an on-screen display, because in the Sky Surfer that I'm going to build at some point, it's going to have a Kopilot and an easy OSD in it. I'd prefer if it was just one thing, but very good product. Just please, can we have an on-screen display for it? That's my ending remarks. There'll be links to it in the description. As per usual, with it being a Bangor product, will be affiliate links. You're helping out the channel if you buy one. Certainly recommend it for people starting FPV. It's cheap enough. As long as you don't go mad distance and then get lost. If you're in an area where return to launch will bring you back. I have all the faith in it that it will do a circle properly, even though I haven't tested that yet. It's not something that I'm particularly bothered about, and I hadn't got the time or people to test with. But yeah, certainly thumbs up. Like, for what it's meant to do, absolutely A star, 10 out of 10, fantastic. All the issues that I mentioned are relatively small, but again, for the V2 or as an add-on, please can we have this on-screen display that I've suggested? It can't be that hard, please. But yeah, thank you very much for watching this. Subscribe if you're new here. Like if you like this type of thing. And again, because it was a podcast, I didn't actually mention this at the beginning, but that's why the screen's black and there's not a talking head or anything, just because I can't be arsed. I'd rather just talk about things and feel comfortable that I'm not having to present. Yeah, like, subscribe if you're new. Comment if you have any questions on the Kopilot. This is also going to be released on a Friday, not a Tuesday, which is the normal podcast spot, but that's because of some other... I consider this being a good video, and the good videos come out on Friday for this week, and then on Tuesday we had the MG90 destruction video, which is just a fun video to have out there. But anyway, I'm going now because I need a drink, because I've been talking solidly for like half an hour. 25 minutes. Not bad. But yeah, also feel free to leave comments, as I say, back questions. Also, if you use these yourself, what your feelings are towards them. And if you have rigged up one of them, is it a Minimo SD, I think it's called, to one of these? Let me know how that went and how easy it was, especially if you've got a video on it. I'll happily take a look, and if I decide to go down a Minimo SD route, if ZOHD make me cry and not release an OSD for this, we can get to that later down the road. But But for now, that will be it. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.